Tonight, breaking news as we come on the air.
Well, the power of social media's influence.
Today, it seems like everyone is in a battle for the most clicks.
It is well known that human attention is drawn to novelty.
She has more than 5 million Instagram followers and over 15 million subscribers on YouTube channels.
And a growing podcast can be an excellent travel companion.
Companies paid out $744 million to Instagram influencers last year alone.
What is contained in this information? Is the source credible? Where is this information gathered from?
Anybody can deliver news via social media.
But now with social media, it's much harder to tell the difference.
So where can people go?
So how can we tell the difference? Is there any way?
You know, for 44 years now, I've carried a backpack. I remember my very first Pac-Man plastic rubber combo back to school specials. Anybody remember that first backpack? Oh yeah. The backpack since that day has been part of my daily life. Even after becoming a senior executive at a large company, I opted out of the attaché case or the shoulder bag. I opted out of the man purse for the utilitarian capability of the backpack. This is the one I carry with me these days. It's a bit worn. It's seen everything from time on a lacrosse field when I coached to family vacations, important life-altering meetings. It's been on buses and planes and trains. It's spent time in multiple countries. It's literally traveled tens of thousands of miles. It's been present for many conversations, some of them with many of you. And yet you would likely have no idea what's in it unless I showed it to you. You could assume that it houses things like my laptop or a tablet, maybe some important documents, maybe even a snack or my lunch. All of that may be true, but I got a confession to make. My backpack is 10 times worse than any purse, any briefcase, or any other mobile storage at collecting clutter and chaos. And as time goes by, this backpack, every meeting that happens, every encounter, every conversation, they often generate something that is handed to me, something that might be important. Things like reports or a piece of mail that needs a response, or even a gift sometimes, or a card. And without fail, all of those things find their way into my backpack. And before I know it, this thing right here is so heavy and full, if I don't address the menagerie that's happening inside of this backpack and clean it out, I'm in trouble. Now, my wife loves to throw a little shade and judgment my way, maybe a little sarcasm when I clean my backpack out, okay? Because it collects all kinds of objects, tools, and trinkets along the way as well. And then I have to have time to vet what's important. What do I keep in here? What do I need to address? What needs to stay in there for a later time? And there's this favorite spot in my living room. It's like a corner chair that I sit in all the time. It's my favorite place to sit. And it's my choice spot for the clean out. And as I pull everything out, it takes up about 10 square feet in that corner. Michelle delights at making fun of the randomness of what's in here. More importantly, making fun of me. And there are things in here that are super important, you know. Those things I usually start in a pile like, hey, I'm gonna make sure I put this back in there, like my Bible, it's always with me, right? But there's other things in here that are not always in here. You know, there's buck knife, because you never can tell. Gotta be ready for action at any point in time. There's a rubber band, an extra pair of socks, super important. A half-crushed pack of peanut butter crackers in case, you know, always be prepared, that kind of thing. And super important, I know I'm not alone here, ketchup packets. You gotta have ketchup packets. Brother man, you do not want to get caught without ketchup packets. Let's see. Oh, look. Oh, man, I thought I lost that. This is the fish bottle opener I got from my daughter for Father's Day right here. Super important, you know. All of those things in there. And then sometimes there's, you know, don't judge me, okay? But there's that set of papers that gets crushed by your laptop. This is this super important stuff right here, right? And, you know, you got to just shove that down for later. All of those things kind of get shoved in the backpack, and it needs to be cleaned out. I have to decide what needs to stay and what has to go, right? There has to be a purpose for the things I'm carrying in here, and it's up to me. I have to decide what's important and what gets to stay. It's the same with the voices and influences that bombard us day after day. We may not physically have a backpack carrying around those voices, but that influence, we do carry that with us. We're going to continue talking about the voices that influence us in this new series, Under the Influence. And last week, Pastor Angie Frame talked about the voices that influence us from our past, the voices that shape our idea of who God is. If you missed it, please go back and watch it. It's a great, great message. We all need to hear it. And like those voices that speak to us from our past experiences, we're going to talk today about the seemingly endless list that are seeking to speak to us and trying to shape us in our present day lives. You know, it's no secret that in the past 3 decades, our ability to gain access to information has grown exponentially. That access has given a platform to all kinds of voices, and it's given birth to platforms that exist to interface with you and I as often as they can. From the scrolling to the news feed, to the sound bites, to the news cycle. Creators and influencers, news anchors, authors, teachers, politicians, thinkers, experts, and yes, even religious leaders are vying for a few moments to put into our ears what they believe is important. Jesus actually talked about this to his followers when he was teaching on earth. He had this common phrase that he would use quite often as he was teaching. It went something like this. It said, "For those who have ears, let them hear." For those who have ears, let them hear. And it seems a little redundant. Of course, if you have ears, you should hear. So why would Jesus say it out loud? Well, because he knew that the act of hearing is not just sound hitting your eardrum and receiving a vibration and recognizing a sound. It's actually taking in the thoughts and the words and the ideals and having your brain process it and the application and coming up with an application for that information. Jesus challenged his listeners to discern what they were being told. In 2 places in the Bible, Jesus says these statements. He says, "Consider carefully what you hear, and therefore consider carefully how you listen." Consider what you hear and how you listen. In his own teachings, we have to consider the content of what we hear. That's what he's saying. And then carefully focus on how we're listening to it, the posture that we're in. I think this serves as a reminder that whatever we take in, whatever we hear, we need to be careful about what we listen to and how we listen to it. The word that Jesus would have used in the Greek is prosetika, which literally means to carefully and closely examine. Now, I don't want to speak for you, but maybe you can identify with me in this way. With everything that comes my way, with all the information that's not only available at times, but seems to kind of be thrown at me in my daily life, I don't have enough time in my day to closely examine everything I hear. And often, you know what that means. It finds its way here. Like my backpack, I toss in what I hear, and it's what's offered to me in that metaphorical bag until I can get to it. Lots of stuff gets into my life backpack, if you will. And most of it's good stuff. You know, people recommend books all the time. So I'm reading a couple of books right now. And so those are with me. Those are great voices I hear. There's a couple of them. And that always kind of gives me a little bit of anxiety because I'm a slow reader. I'm not a fast reader. And most of the time I have a stack of books on my desk at home, bookshelves in my office here at the church. Yes, sometimes a book is literally hanging out in my backpack that I haven't even cracked the bind on yet. It needs to be explored. One of those books right now that's begging for my time is called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. If only I could slow down long enough to read it, it would be okay. There are so many suggestions that kind of come my way, suggestions like YouTube videos that people share, content from world leaders and experts and even other pastors. And I want to get to all of it, but it usually takes some time. And in my opinion, it really bears examination on my part. So if you couple that with all of the content I choose to engage on a daily basis, the content we all choose for ourselves, it can get quite daunting to hear the voices properly. And our backpack can literally get heavy and become a burden if we're not careful. So how do we do this? How do we consider carefully what we hear and closely examine and vet the voices around us? I'm going to bring these two statements back up. This is really where it starts. Jesus talks about consider carefully what we hear and how we listen to it. So I want to restate those two things because this is the starting point. This is the starting point. I value the teaching of Jesus and his words above all other things as a follower of Jesus. When he says I should do these things and consider how I hear everything around me, then this is the starting point. This is my guide to where I go. Even if you're here today and you're still trying to figure out who Jesus is, who Jesus says he is, if you are trying to figure out if all the things that we believe as followers of Jesus are real, this makes sense, right? We shouldn't be prone to take things at face value just hearing them. So if we have a starting point, let's talk about how we discern if the voices that are influencing us are ones that we should listen to. And let's start with a question today. Let's start with this question. Do they only tell us what we want to hear? Do they only tell us what we want to hear? Voices like this are a self-inflicted algorithm. For fun today, before I walked up to come in here, I asked Siri how I look today, and her response was perfect as always. Thank you, Siri. Little ego boost. I'm pretty sure if I ask her tomorrow, I'll get a similar answer. I don't think she's going to change her mind in a couple of days and say, Bryan, you look like a dumpster fire. Okay? So I know that if I need to hear a voice that's going to boost my ego a little bit, I know where I can get it. I know where I can hear it. And that seems innocuous, and it really is. It's for fun, right? But what about the voices that we do hear from, right? The ones that we interface with all the time. What about that one? Like Facebook in the feed there. Maybe Facebook's not your thing. Maybe it's X, formerly Twitter, or maybe you're hitting those videos on TikTok from those creators there, or as the kids call it, the gram, Instagram, right? What about Echo and Alexa and all of those things? Their algorithm is to hear and then send you stuff that it thinks you like. The things that agree with your stance or what you're looking for. And look, there's ways to cut off the mic feature and everything, but every time you interact with a post or scroll the feed, these systems are waiting for the split-second pauses in your viewing to decide what it wants to feed you. Have you ever thought about it like that? That word feed when it comes to a digital interface? Depending on what I like to consume, more voices will be added in nanoseconds to the conversation to feed me. But social media isn't the only influencer out there. Media is in the branding of our beliefs. And before you hit send on the email, these are only two of them, but they're the two prominent ones. What about these guys, right? A friend of mine said it this way in a conversation we were having recently. When we engage with media and shows and whatever it is that we're consuming, we are the product the channel is selling to their advertisers. We're the product. So slowly, it becomes not only us looking to hear what we like to hear or want to hear, but what someone else thinks that we should hear. We have to be the kind of people that seek truth, real truth. Truth starts with our understanding and our relationship with Jesus. Jesus himself called himself the truth, And our relationship with him, what we believe about his teaching, that's the importance. That's where truth lies. And look, I'm guilty of this. I can find someone that agrees with me, but whether I'm right or wrong is a question between me and God. He's the filter I should be looking at. Do I filter my wants and my opinions out for the better, Christ-centered way? Paul, who was an early follower of Jesus, would write to a young pastor that he was mentoring, whose name was Timothy. He wrote these words to him. He said, "For a time is coming when people will no longer listen to the sound and wholesome teaching. They will follow their own desires and will look for teachers who will tell them whatever their itching ears want to hear." What does it mean to have itching ears? I think we know, but let's unpack it a little bit. Itching ears look for voices and opinions and commentary that will support their lifestyle and their life decisions, their personal choices, instead of sound and challenging teaching, which only comes from Jesus. Itching ears seek allies with similar bias for the sake of being right. And in turn, it makes those who are opposed to their life choices wrong. In the division of our world today, this is the prevailing wind. But we are not these people. We should not give in to our itching ears. As followers of Jesus, we are meant to set aside our desires for the truth and love of Jesus. We have to be mindful not to look for things that will only seek to influence our desires. Our desire to be right, our desire to win, our desire to be validated. When we determine that a voice can actually be listened to and examined, that it's going to challenge us, then it gives us an opportunity to really dig into that influence. Not looking for what's easy and agreeable. And if we can answer that question, we should ask another. Here's another question we should ask. Do we know the source? Do we know the source? We have to do research. And that does require time in a time-starved world. Early in my ministry, I was working with a young leader, and she had read this very interesting article on the nature of God. And more importantly, she had kind of focused in on this one very challenging question, a certain question in an article. So she posted the question on social media. She gave her opinion on the question and asked for a respectful conversation about the question. You want to guess how that went? Not so good. By early afternoon, she was in my office and we were dissecting the whole situation. And the first question I asked was, did you consider the source of the article? Like, who wrote it? What's their background? Where did their research come from? Her answer was, hey, I did. I searched. I did a Google search. I looked up this publisher, and the article seemed credible. But there is a difference between seeming credible and being credible. So as we continued our conversation, we did the research. And we found out a great deal about the author and his stance and his affiliations, his beliefs. And it was clear that he did not align with the beliefs of our church. It didn't take forever, but it took some time. And look, we should all do this. The question is, do we do it every time? When we hear something, do we slow down long enough to determine the source, understand the context the statements are made in, and make a value judgment based on facts and fact-finding? Thing is, I'm not sure we do. I don't always do that. I haven't always done that. And look, the answer for sound research in your bag, it doesn't live in the Google search. That can't answer every question for you. It doesn't answer in the truth or just because somebody makes a YouTube video about it. Or our newest influence, AI. A simple Google research now populates an artificial intelligence response at the top of every search. We'll say it again, artificial intelligence. To be clear, I'm not downing any of this. there's good content and good people who are posting things and utilizing this stuff for good. However, taking content from these sources at face value is a dangerous proposition. If the hook at the top of the post or the title grabs my attention and then I take that information and what follows next as truth without considering the source, I run the risk of perpetuating misinformation. If I share information with anyone, if I take the advice of that information, I need to know that what I'm consuming is based in truth, and you should too. Just before Easter, my good friend, Pastor Beth Stoddard, sent me a message about a voice that I should consider, a book that I should read. I get recommendations like that all the time from really great friends who are trusted. But just an hour later, that book was already ordered digitally and the hardback was on the way to my house. And here's why I did it. I know Pastor Beth has researched the source. She's looked into it, that her recommendation has merit and that it's based on fact finding, because I know I can trust her. She's proven worthy of being a trusted voice in my life. She's an important, verified influence, and I have many other colleagues like that. And at times, I make those recommendations to other people as they look at me as a source of influence and my influence as well. But I'm going to slow down here for a second because this also applies to what you're hearing right now from this platform. This message that I'm delivering, it involves hours of research, references, and reading. It's vetted by our teaching team. It lands on the desk of our senior pastor, Bryan Hughes, before it comes to this platform. And after all of that, you should still consider the source. When a Bible verse is on the screen, you should go and look it up. Read further, understand it. We actually hope you do that. We encourage you. That's what we want you to do. When you have a question about a message, we encourage you to reach out to us, because none of our pastors are perfect, but we work diligently to verify our sources and ask questions before we step out here to instruct you. And our purpose is to always point you towards Jesus. But we're fallible and capable of missing the mark. You have a responsibility. We all have a responsibility to vet the voices and the sources and the message that is coming to us. And after we vet them through fact-finding, after we figure out if a voice will challenge us and that the communication is coming from a legitimate source, then we should continue asking questions. Here's one more. Do they add value? Does the voice add value? Do the voices influencing you and shaping you add value or breed dissent? I'm going to say it again. Do the voices influencing you and shaping you add value or do they breed dissent? Do they point you towards a life honoring God or in some other worldly direction? You know, we're not the only people in time who have struggled to hear things clearly and vet what's being communicated to us. This was a common problem in Jesus' time as well. One time as Jesus was speaking to the crowd, he taught this. He said, "Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit." And look, we're not in the process, we're not in the habit of labeling people false prophets. And to be clear, this particular piece of scripture, Jesus is speaking to a specific issue in his time and in the moment. However, every teaching of Jesus that we hear, we can glean some insight into our current lives. Good fruit and bad fruit, we understand that. We know that, right? We understand the difference between good and bad. If we have a voice that's trying to influence us and it's clear that they're going to lead us in the wrong direction, we're likely not going to listen to that advice from that person. But that assumes it's clear that the direction is bad. I want to look at the scripture again because Jesus says, look, they come in sheep's clothing, peaceful and focused, but he says you have to look inside. It's not just the appearance. because a second look and what we're talking about here today, a few more questions and some research may render that the appearance does not always match the motives. And although we don't use the word discernment on a daily basis, we spend a lifetime discerning all kinds of information. I love the way that famous author and theologian C.S. Lewis said. He said, discernment is deciding between what is good and what is almost good. I agree. And I believe the dividing line between good and almost good starts with motive, and it's decided by the fruit that a voice produces in our lives. That same follower of Jesus, Paul, he's going to be writing letters to all these churches that he plants, and he's going to write to a church in Galatia and about the fruit that's born out of a connection and a life connected with God. And he says it like this. This is what he says. He says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. So when we ask the question, does a voice add value in my life, in my journey? We need to have these things in mind, the filter of good fruit of that voice. Are the voices in our lives, are they promoting love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness? Are they promoting self-control? Do the voices we listen to add value and still allow us the opportunity to have a civil disagreement about things? Do they challenge us to grow in our faith and understanding of that faith? Those are the kind of voices we're looking for, but I have to be honest with you, there are a multitude of voices out there today, and they're destructive. They don't build up, they tear down. They divide us instead of working to unify us. They seek to attack instead of affirm. And the argument in those voices, that they're telling us the hard truth of how it is out there, that we all need a dose of reality. But the real truth is, those voices major in turmoil, and guess what? They're lacking in love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and they're lacking in self-control. I'm looking for this voice, a voice that influences me to live this way. Not so I can avoid the reality of what's happening in our world or deny the truth, but so I can combat it with a counterintuitive, counterculture Jesus way, with good fruit. These things as my weapon instead of hatred and strife. A voice that adds value to my life and brings fruit in my life. And that leads me to one more question, a very important question. Do they point us towards God? Do the voices that influence us, do they point us towards God? When I allow someone to influence me or to help shape me or even inform my opinions, this question tops my list. Look, we all have different desires and opinions. We all take different stances on different issues. We may civically believe in different ways to approach the problems of our world and our country, our state, or our towns, but above all, I'm a follower of Jesus. He is my ultimate authority. To him alone I owe my allegiance. His teaching, my top influence. His voice, the one I want to hear. Because of that truth in my life, I want voices. Let's bring this question up one more time. We bring it up. I want voices that are pointing me towards God, encouraging me to pray and listen for his direction. I want voices around me that point me towards God and not myself. Maybe you have a trusted voice like that in your life. I have a few. Like you, the people who teach from this platform here at PCC, they're trusted voices. I know my colleagues bear fruit in their lives. I know that ultimately they're always going to point me towards Jesus. My father is another trusted voice. He always points me towards God. On Father's Day, I talked to him for well over an hour on the phone. That's not something that we usually do. We caught up for, what seemed, the time just kept going, but we lost track of time. But he would say on certain occasions throughout the conversation, hey, that sounds really challenging, Bryan. Yeah, just a reminder, son. There's a plan in this. You can trust God in this. Pray about it. study, meditate on him. He would always point me back. I love that I can have an unbiased conversation with him about anything and everything, from parenting to politics, from fishing to what the future holds, and I know that he relies on God for his understanding. The Bible tells us this too. In the book of Proverbs, it says these words: trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. I want my paths to be straight. So when we allow someone's voice to influence us or something's content to direct us, does it ultimately point us towards God's understanding and not our own? When we do this, do we surround ourselves with voices of influence that promote our submission to God? Because if we do, it can and it will change everything. I want to go back to the words that Jesus spoke that I put up here early today is consider carefully what you hear. Consider carefully what you hear. He was talking about his voice and his teaching, his influence. And part of his voice can be influenced by trusted voices around us if they're doing the same thing and considering his direction. He continues after the statement. This is what he says. He says, consider carefully what you hear. With the measure that you use it, it will be measured to you, and even more. Voices that point us towards God and not ourselves understand that when we apply what Jesus teaches, he gives us a deeper understanding. And that deeper understanding leads to his influence in our lives. And then how we take that teaching and use it, it allows us the potential to be the voice of influence in a world that is struggling and needs Jesus' influence now in every single way. We have the opportunity to be the ambassadors of his voice and his ways. If we consider carefully what we hear and how we hear it, if we choose wisely to do the work discerning what we carry with us, like this backpack, we need to decide if it's time to clear it out, what doesn't have value anymore, what doesn't belong in our lives. Always vetting what's with us and what shouldn't be, what's useful for us to carry. Because when we can choose this, we influence the challenge around us. We can choose to be influenced by voices that would challenge us every single day. They're founded and sourced in fact, that add value and bring fruit to our lives, and that point us ultimately towards God. It could lighten our load. It could increase our capabilities, encourage us, and ultimately equip us to use our voices to do the same for those around us. So as Jesus said, for those who have ears, let them hear.
For those who have ears, let them hear. And that's us. So let's hear this message about vetting the influences around us. Pastor Bryan Pope gave us some helpful criteria on how to evaluate the voices that are vying for our attention. Now, don't worry about how you're going to remember all of them. We have a handout for you that you can download from our website. You can just click on the link in the chat and get it, or just go to our website and download it. Take that with you and use it to make intentional decisions about what you carry around with you. Make that load a little lighter. Let it equip and encourage you to be the person that God wants you to be. Now, I hope as you enter this week, you'll be more aware of what's influencing you. And come back next week as we talk about how to make God's voice the primary influence in your life. We'll see you then.